Feels like a nice fish. Oh yeah. Bruiser, baby. Nice wintertime bass right there. Black and blue Chippewa. Love that chippy. Well, it's cold out here today, boys. Although it's not as cold as it has been. It's about 45 or so right now. It was high of 35 yesterday though, and tomorrow it's supposed to be a high of 24 and a low of 1 with 3 inches of snow. Most of the small ponds and lakes are froze over here in Kansas. This is a little bit bigger sand pit. Stays open a little bit longer. So anyway, last time I was talking about having patience with your lures and try to give you guys a couple quick winter fishing tips. And today I just brought the jig out. I know I can put it in my hand and catch fish, so I'm gonna just work this over nice and easy here. Like I said before, I start slow. And when I say slow, it's can be misleading, because I'm not moving the jig all that much. But when I do, it's it's not a slow hop. It's a fast hop off of the bottom. And these fish will sit down, especially in these sand pits. They'll sit down in the dying grass down there. And there's a drop off right here I'm fishing. It's probably 12 to 15 foot deep on the inside, and then it gets a little bit deeper out here, maybe 15 to 20 on the outside. So hold on. So that's what I'm targeting, is that dying grass. And I'll just kind of hop through there with this 3/8 ounce football jig here, which I really like in the wintertime. It's good all year long, but for some reason in the wintertime, the football jig is really what they want. So I'm not moving the jig very far, and I'm leaving it sit, pretty good pauses, in between my jigging. It's probably sitting there for a good, 5 or 10 seconds, and then I'll just kind of hop it quick but not far, if that makes sense. And most of these fish that I'll catch are actually not feeding right now, but they're sitting down there in that grass. And there's crayfish, that live in here naturally. Most lakes, throughout the U.S. at least, have crawfish in just about every lake, unless there's something going on in the environment where there's just not a lot in that area. But these sand pits are loaded with crawfish. So, if I can get the jig down there near the fish, and I think the idea is to let it sit long enough to, if they're within a few feet, then the longer you let it sit, the closer they're going to get, because they're not moving real fast right now. It's cold. They're going to kind of just be easing along these little drop-offs and searching for crawfish to feed up on before they don't have anything to eat for the winter time. So you just want to be fish slow, but move the jig in quick, sharp hops. A lot of times I'll be sitting there and then I'll give it a sharp hop, and just that hop is right then is when that fish will decide to eat it. So it is a reaction bite. So you don't want to just be too slow with the movement. You want to be slow with your fishing. So hope that makes sense for you guys. And you'll see me sometimes, I'm kind of jerking and yanking at it, but there's little clumps of grass down here, and some of them are still a little bit more alive than others, and you just never know really kind of what you're in down there. So if I feel like I'm hung a little bit, I'll put two hands on the rod and yank it a little bit harder out of that grass. And a lot of times that's when you'll get bit. So you just never know. In other times of the year, if it was in October, November, before it got brutally cold, you could catch them doing the same thing, but you can just you can speed up your retrieve a little bit, because they will chase it down, and they will they might not all be on the bottom. A lot of times they'll follow it down there. So different times of year, different presentations. With how cold it is now, these fish are generally on the bottom. They're really not roaming around doing too much. And they may move up and down this shore here, come out to this point and cross back to this kind of point here. But most of these wintertime fish are probably not moving much farther than from that dock to this dock and back and forth. And usually the good thing about wintertime fishing is if you find a fish or two, you probably found 10 or 20 fish, or possibly more than that. So especially if you're in a bigger body of water, sometimes in the small ponds, and there may be only 4 or 5 fish, or 2 or 3 fish on some of these spots. But if you find the right ones in the wintertime, there's going to be several fish within a pretty decently small area. So that's again kind of where the patience comes in. I made 4 or 5 casts before I caught that one, and it may be 5 or 10 more casts until I catch another one, but I know they're down there. So that's kind of where the importance of making sure that you're working that lure properly and just covering the entire area. So sometimes the littlest movement can just be, the biggest factor that you're missing. So, and there are times when I'll throw it out and I'll leave it sit for 10 or 15 seconds before I start moving it. But like I said, these fish are down there, and they're you know, they're catchable. They're not ferociously feeding, but they will eat if presented the right opportunity. There's some grass there. Might get into a fish here. Got some good grass down there that I'm feeling. And whenever I start to feel, you know, some real good grass, I'll slow down even more. I'll let it sit in there. Let it sit in that grass. I'll kind of tighten up on it, and if I still feel the grass, you know, like a little bit of resistance, then I'll pull a little bit more, because sometimes there may be a fish there, and I'll just make sure nothing's got it, and then I'll kind of hop it free, and then it'll fall back down and sit back on top of the grass. So I'm really just coming across the tops of these little grass patches, and in some places there's no grass, and in other places there's, you know, live grass, and other places there's dead grass. So you know, a lot of times when it's real cold like this, I'll catch them right in it. Like, I'll feel like I'm hung up, and I'll just start popping it out of there, and as soon as you do, wham, one will smash it. And then sometimes if you can find you know, a little spot where there's no grass, but is, you know, heavily surrounded by good patches, those can be really key spots, because they'll all kind of get in the middle, you know, in the little openings between the grass patches, and just bunch up and sit in there. You know, when they're like that, it can be really good to target them with a shaky head in those open patches. And this is a pretty good sized lake. I don't know how well you can see it. It's kind of misty and foggy out here, but it's probably, you know, at least 40 or 50 acres, I would say, maybe a little bit bigger. And this is the south side shoreline, so a lot of times this time of year the wind is blowing into this bank, which, you know, can, I think, helps position the fish, you know, on this side of the drop off as opposed to the other side. See, I'm stuck in some grass there. This is right where that first nice one came from. So I'm going to really slow it down through here. I'm going to shake it a little bit on the edges of the grass. Then I'm going to go back to my hops. And that one that bit, he, you know, he didn't just bum rush it out of nowhere, but the bite was very distinct. You know, you felt him grab a hold of it pretty good. So that's a good sign. There should be at least a few more fish around here feeding somewhere. And this side is kind of, so the drop off kind of starts about halfway out on these docks. I mean, it starts back there, but it starts getting deep about halfway out, and then it keeps on going, and then about here towards the end of the docks, it starts to level out, and you don't really have that incline anymore. So a lot of times in the fall, as we're getting colder and colder, these fish are going to be up here in between these docks, and like in between that next one's good. On the back side there's kind of a flat that has some shallower water that comes out further, so that little drop over there is really good for fall, because they can get up on that flat and they can feed, and they can drop back down to that drop off there and just hang out in the grass. And they kind of do the same thing here too, so I would imagine that they do it all throughout this cove. There's probably fish that you know, move up and down this little ledge here and you know, do their thing. But as it gets colder and colder, they'll start to go further and further out, and they won't really come up into that super shallow stuff anymore. They should be about at that point, especially with the cold front moving in tomorrow. It's, like I said, it's like 40 degrees right now, and raining, misting. Tomorrow it's supposed to be, you know, 24 as a high and 1 as a low, with 3 inches of snow. So you know, we're prefrontal conditions here, and pretty much going into the dead of winter. So this is one of the last opportunities that these fish are really going to have to kind of feed up before it gets, you know, brutally cold. See, there's, at the end of the drop off, the grass has a better environment to grow, because it gets a little bit more sandy and not as much you know, rock and stuff as there is up on the bank. So there's usually a little bit thicker line of you know, fresher grass out here at the end of the drop off, and then once you get past that, there's no grass. So a good way to do it when you're fishing in a lake like this, you know, ideally if I was in a boat, and actually when I cast this way and I go, you know, from left to right or right to left, I'm coming down, you know, I'm paralleling that grass line, and I'm just hopping through there. Now when I cast out here, you know, I've got to go cast past it and then work my way back up into it. And you know, so you come through a smaller region of it, but you come in a different direction. So it just all depends on where they're sitting. Now I always try to keep, you know, there's kind of a fine line between you know, keeping just enough slack in your line to let the jig fall back down, but still I'm still very close to, you know, being in contact with it. So as it falls, if something swipes at it, you're still going to feel it. So that's another important thing when you're jigging like this, is, you know, always keep a little bit of contact with the bait. Don't ever just, you know, even when you're letting it sit there, you know, my line is tight. It's sitting, not moving. But if there is any movement down there, you'll feel it. It's really important when you're fishing, you know, deeper like this, deeper grass. And when it's windy like this, I let it fall on slack line. You know, it's 20 feet deep out there. The wind blows your line sideways a little bit. Just, you know, throw it out there. I like to kind of count to 20, 25 or so. That way I know that it's for sure on the bottom. And then I'll slowly start to, you know, tighten that line up until I can really feel the jig. You know, and it's amazing how you know, how well that grass will actually survive down there. You know, this water's probably, you know, mid-30s, high 30s, and there's still quite a bit of grass growing. You know, most of it's dying off, but there is some green grass still down there, 15, 20 foot. And that's what these fish are sitting in. Bank, you know, I still consider it bank fishing from the dock, but you gotta remember we're all the way out here at the end of the drop off, so you know, work your bait all the way back to you. I can't stress that enough. Can't tell you how many times I've got bit right underneath me. You know, a lot of people would think it's just too cold. It's too cold to catch them. It's too cold to catch them on a jig. You know, it's just not true. Those fish, especially with a jig, as long as the water is not frozen, you can catch them. You know, it may be 40 degrees, but when you got 20-mile-an-hour wind and mist blowing at your face, it's still cold. So make sure you dress warm. Get you some good gloves. I like these thermal power grab ones. They keep your hands warm pretty good. The key to these is you know, make sure you're nice and warm. Warm them up in your car. Warm your hands up before you put them on, and put them on before you go out in the cold, because they're thermal, so they'll hold in the heat pretty good. Of course, you know, like I said, the 20-mile-an-hour wind is going to get through pretty much anything, but if you put them on when they're warm, it helps a lot. The other reason I like these is they're fairly low profile. They have the rubber on one side, so you know, I can still manage my rod and reel. I can still feel everything real good. I can't stand having a big bulky pair of gloves that you just can't fish right with. I wish we had a little bit of sun today. You know, when it's as cold as it is and has been, if it's a sunny day, you know, sometimes it can make a big difference on just getting these fish to bite. You know, they're down there. Just when that sun's out, they get a little bit of that heat soaked up from the sun rays, and they'll be easier to get them to swing on it.